I think we're in an age of information, and in an age of information, ignorance is a choice. This is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is really a time in history to know how. What is the greatest expression of myself that I can be today? What would love do today? How could I forgive? How could I give in new ways? How would greatness live one lifetime, one day? If everybody was actually on the journey, I think the side effect of that would be dramatic changes that would ultimately take place in the world. And it's not one person. It is a collective network, collective consciousness. If you understand that 95% of most people's thoughts, habits, and behaviors and emotional responses are automatic in nature, like a program, and we go unconscious and default into that state, that same personality, which is pretty much subconsciously programmed, then I got to become conscious of my unconscious self. And I want them to be able to sit with themselves long enough that they no longer want to be that self any longer, that they're so conscious that they won't go unconscious to that person. How do we get from knowing there's a problem with the way humanity thinks and feels to changing it? And more importantly, how do we rewire those impulses? For more than 20 years, I've been scientifically working on this issue. My name is Joe Dispensa. I run an organization called Encephalon. I've written 4 books, and we teach people at events the neuroscience and the biology of how to change, how to transform. We teach people how to come up against those survival systems and work on reconditioning the body to a new mind. We've come down to a simple formula of brain and heart coherence that frees people's minds and opens their hearts and leads them to that door of unlimited possibilities. For the first time in the history of meditation studies, a group of scientists have discovered something really profound that's happening inside someone's body when they apply this formula. If what we uncovered is proof in the scientific field that our greatest human potential has been our thoughts and feelings, my hope is that we'll finally push the needle on the next phase of health and healing for humanity. The amazing thing about it is that when the data says it, I'm not saying it any longer. The data is actually saying it. The majority of people that function in their life, functioning in a state of stress, in a state of survival. They don't even realize it. They've gotten so used to the chemicals and hormones associated with it. They obsess about things. They obsess about people. They obsess about their body. They obsess about time. They're over-focused. They're narrow-focused. They have a habit or a routine that they live by every single day, and they get up and make the same choices and do the same things. You keep doing that, your body's on autopilot. And now it's dragging you into a predictable future based on what you did in the past. And you lose your free will to a set of programs. Most people are thinking about their past, and when they bring up those memories and they feel the emotions, that thought and feeling is conditioning their body into the familiar past. That's the known. So here you have now a species of human beings that are really wired to coexist and to cooperate and to commune and to connect. But in survival, and you're in stress, and the only thing that's important really is you. So you see a fracturing of community when people are living in these stressful states, in these survival states. So what you have across the world is a disease of the body and of the mind. It's a disconnection, it's dysregulation, it's disorder. We try to control and predict everything in our life because every person, every object, everything in our life that's known to us is neurologically mapped in our brain. So as the arousal of the stress hormones heightens, like a lightning storm in the brain starts firing out of order because we're shifting our attention to all these things. But you're sitting in a Zoom call and you're listening to someone carry on, and the sympathetic response is occurring, and now the heart is beating against the closed system because you're not exerting yourself. And when it pushes against the closed system, it causes it to begin to beat incoherently, and incoherent waves cancel each other out. The person is tapping all the resources, all the energy of the body, and making chemistry out of it because there's a danger, a threat in the outer world.
I was a high-performing pharmaceutical sales rep. I was the #1 in the region. I had to be #1. I had to be a perfectionist. I was working like at least 18, 20 hours a day. Sometimes I wouldn't even sleep at night, just trying to do whatever I had to do in order to be the best. I didn't really have time to spend with my family. One day I remember coming home and I couldn't breathe. Like I had the shakes. The ambulance came and they basically broke my door down and rushed me to the hospital. It was pretty extreme. And that they were afraid that if I did not have my thyroid removed, that I would end up having a heart attack.
At the time, I had a lot of anxiety and it came out of the blue. I never had experienced that before in my life. And it was really difficult. And it put me into kind of a dark night of the soul. It got to the point where it's hard for me to be on the phone, to have a conversation, to even go to a restaurant with a friend. And there's just so much fear that was in my body.
I was born with a genetic condition, and it's called cystic fibrosis. It's a pretty serious illness, but I had it under control for the most part. There came to a point when my lungs got infected. The infection had caused enough scar tissue that my lung function had fell down to 30%. At that point, I couldn't really move. I had lost so much weight. I think I was maybe like 85 pounds at the heaviest. It felt there was a lot of finality to it.
I was working as a neurologist in Puerto Rico in 2017, and then Hurricane Maria came, devastated the island. So at that time, I went for a position in Florida. I didn't feel sick. I have been healthy all my life. I noticed the first symptoms of the illness. I felt a very sharp pain in my back, upper back. I said, well, that's strange. I need to have an MRI of the spine. When I look at the MRI of the screen, I see the spine and this black vertebrae. I was diagnosed with a multiple myeloma. Multiple myeloma is a type of malignancy of the bone marrow. And usually, maybe 30, 40 years ago, the prognosis was not good. People last maybe 4 months, 6 months, the most. People die. My wife asked, how much time does he have, the prognosis? And the oncologist said, with the chemotherapy, well, it could be like 2, 3 years.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a long time, and it seems that things are probably, at the worst that I've seen them during my professional career. My name is Dr. Ruth Waterman. I am a medical doctor, and I also have a master's in science. I'm an anesthesiologist. I'm the chair of the Department of Anesthesiology at UC San Diego. One of the things is that right now we use Western medicine, and it does a bunch of things for us. We can cut out a bad gallbladder, we can fix a broken bone, we can give someone a massive blood transfusion while they're bleeding out after an automobile accident. But there are other things that just don't always seem to fit, and we're not totally able to heal a person. And I really think that something's missing.
Take one.
My name's Dr. Carla Stanton, and I am a conventionally trained UK-based physician. I did maybe what a lot of physicians do, or maybe a lot of healthcare practitioners were doing. I was just working harder. I was just trying to force and fight my way with this limited model to figure out a way that I could create a change. And it ultimately wasn't working. And in that process, I was talking to another volunteer and talking about the power of beliefs on our physiology. And I remember he turned to me and he stopped me in my tracks, and he just leaned in and said, "Carla, you have to read Dr. Joe Dispensa." And I was like, "Who?" I decided to witness transformation with my own eyes, see any patterns that were emerging. I had the privilege of fitting heart rate monitors to, about 100 participants per event. And I was able to look at their data at the end of the event, have an interview with them, and then marry their subjective experience with our objective measurements. I kept being astounded by the human heart.
In the shed was my wheelchair and my walker, and I donated it to charity.
Now I don't have a single speck of doubt. I could not do this. I need someone to hold for balance. My balance is next level.
In a very loving way, they started telling me, maybe it's time for you to give up. So I have two beautiful boys.
Like, I used to have to hold all of my muscles to keep me square, and it's just gone.
I have no headaches, no migraine. My head doesn't hurt. I don't want to say it, but I feel like something happened to me.
Now I'm walking. I'm walking for the first time in 2.5 years.
Welcome to the singularity moment.
My name is Andrew Wright, and when I first started working with Dr. Joe in 2013, I helped facilitate the events. I helped create the setting and the environment that allows people to surrender and experience other states of consciousness. I've watched his work unfold from his personal experiences and his scientific knowledge, applying that scientific knowledge to those experiences, and to create a way for people to create their own reality, to have their own experiences and their own transformation.
And because of the experiences that Dr. Joe was seeing, he wanted to measure more and more things. He started measuring EEG and heart rate variability.
The first studies that we did showed that 80% of the people had more than 90% change in their brain for the better. So we thought, well, we're doing this in 4 days and 1 evening. What if we had 7 days?
In these 7 days, I lead people through a series of meditations where they learn how to go deeper within themselves. We teach people how their brain works, how their body works. Then we do specific breathing techniques, and we do 4 types of meditations: seated, laying down, standing, and walking. And we do coherence healings. We want people to understand how their mind works, how to focus on these techniques to get greater outcomes, and to really enjoy the process of changing themselves.
As he was building the model and seeing the results from what people were doing, he started to figure out that it was all about heart and brain coherence. The formula is heart and brain coherence.
This researcher named Harold Saxton Burr, who studied these electromagnetic fields around living organisms. And so he was able, in the 40s, to measure these electromagnetic fields. He started studying biological systems of greater complexity until ultimately he started studying human beings. And he studied women that had a propensity for uterine cancer, and he measured the electromagnetic field around the organ and around the body. And every single woman that had uterine cancer had this very specific pattern as information in the electromagnetic field. But there were certain women that didn't have uterine cancer, but had the pattern in the field. Every one of those women that had the pattern in the field ultimately developed uterine cancer. So the information was actually in the field before it appeared in three-dimensional reality. So he said, maybe I have this backwards. It's not matter that's emitting the field. It's actually the field and the information in the field that's actually informing matter. If we change the information in the field, can we change matter? And so we teach people how to create this type of coherence and move to that place where they are connected. When they have brain and heart coherence, if they actually feel the emotion of what they're creating before it happens, could they shorten the distance between the thought of what they want and the experience of having it if they create from the field instead of from matter, between one point of consciousness and another point of consciousness?
Traditionally, meditation falls into basically two camps, kind of the religious Tibetan Buddhism or various types of meditation attached to religion. And then there's using meditation for becoming more calm and less stressful in kind of a therapeutic sense. And I would say that Dr. Joe's events don't really land in either one of those.
I think that science is the contemporary language of mysticism. I think science is what demystifies the mystical. And if you can combine quantum physics with neuroscience and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology, which is the mind-body connection, epigenetics, electromagnetism, all of this information empowers the person to a greater level of awareness. And so we use science as that model, and I think that the moment you use tradition or religion or spirituality or culture, I think you divide an audience, but I think science tends to create community. It wasn't until an event in 2019 when a researcher and medical doctor that does clinical studies for a living attended one of our events where a lot of the stuff in terms of mysticism that I talk about became an interest of study.
My name is Hillary Hamilton, and I was a partner in pain clinics throughout Southern California for many years. I can tell you a little bit more about it. I had been to a Dr. Joe Dispensa workshop and just fell in love with what he was teaching. I couldn't just treat the patients and send them on their way. I wanted to give them an alternative way to help them heal. When I started working with Dr. Toby, we had a multidisciplinary approach to helping people with chronic pain. So he was the medical piece, I was the alternative piece. So Toby was like, what are you teaching our patients? I said, Toby, you got to come with me to an event. You just do. You have to come. And he said, later, I'll go in a couple months, or I'll go in 6 weeks, or whatever the case may be. But I kept after him.
She kept talking to me about Dr. Joe, constantly tried to convince me to go to one of these events. I had to keep the discussion a little bit on the surface, quite honestly, because I hadn't really looked into his methods a lot. I believe often the problem between Western medicine and alternative medicine lies in the fact of how observed effects are explained. I think nobody can really argue with a lot of outcomes when you look at meditation, energy work, acupuncture, all those things. The problem often lies in how these observations are explained. Because if they use language that we don't use in Western medicine, or there's a little bigger jump from A to B than I would have done, it's easy for me to say, well, this is, I can't follow that thought jump, or I don't think there was the right methodology trying to explain it, and thereby I reject the validity of the whole observation. I'm a physician scientist. I trained as a physician in Germany, graduated from med school in '98, and all the other training I did here in the United States. I trained in preliminary medicine anesthesia residency at the University of California in San Diego, then did a subspecialty training in pain management at UCSF in San Francisco, and then joined the faculty back at UCSD in the Department of Anesthesia. When I joined UCSD, I also started a master's in advanced science with focus on clinical research because I really wanted to learn the in and outs of designing research studies.
He finally came to Cancun in 2019, and it was maybe the second or third day there was a woman standing on the stage who had uterine cancer.
And there came the words I thought I would never hear from a person wearing a white coat, but he said, "There's no single trace of cancer left in your body."
Many tumors in her abdomen and in her uterus, and she overcame uterine cancer with Dr. Joe's work.
And I was just sitting there and thinking, I wonder if that happened, wonder how that happened, and how would I test for that? How would I design a study that could kind of get a little more detail on this question? And then it really hit me, realizing I was sitting in an audience of 1,500 people that all were in the same time zone. They all spent 1 week together in the same location, on the same schedule, eating the same food, having pretty much the same sleep-wake cycle, and getting the same intervention. Because that is one of the crux, I think, when you look at meditation. Meditation is not one singular thing that you do. There's certain people that meditate maybe for 10 minutes on their app every other week. And there's other people that spend their life, decades, just meditating pretty much the majority of the day.
So the next thing I know, Toby is at breakfast right up close in my face saying, "We have to do research. We just have to start measuring this." I was so happy that he finally saw it the way we had been seeing it.
How do you define meditation and how can you compare studies if the intervention is so different? I mean, the richness of this data set by applying the same research protocol in the same way to different patient populations is just enormous. At that point, because Helmel was a good friend of mine that I shared an office for a decade for, I already was very aware of how all of the techniques that he can use and we have available at the lab in UCSD could actually measure that.
Speeding. My name is Hamil Patel. I'm a professor and vice chair of research in the Department of Anesthesiology at the University of California, San Diego.
So tell me about the moment when Toby said, "Hey, you got to go to this event, this guy."
We got to talk. We pitched this idea of, there's this event I was at in Cancun. Red flags going off Cancun. What kind of event in Cancun? How sciencey could that be? He said, "I saw some things. I saw people cured of cancer." How long was the event? 2-3 years? It was 7 days. And what he said made absolutely no sense to me as a scientist, right? There's no way. I'm like, I think it's a placebo. I think they're making all this stuff up. Let's sit and think about what you want to do.
When Dr. Toby first started talking to me about Dr. Hemmel, I, of course, wanted to find out who he was. And he's a very well-published scientist, a researcher with over 170, peer-reviewed papers that he had written.
I got my PhD in pharmacology and toxicology, looking mostly at cardiovascular systems and looking at how you can protect the heart from ischemic injury. I rotated through neuropharmacology lab. We were looking at the retina as a way of looking at how proteins traffic in and out of the nucleus. The Nobel Prize for this was awarded many years later. I found a second lab I rotated through. It was a cardiovascular laboratory. The focus of the lab was to figure out how to protect the heart from ischemic injury. We had discovered a series of studies that showed that if you treated cells in animals with opioid compounds, morphine, specific delta opioid compounds, you'd actually cause this massive protective effect from a heart attack. So you're basically conditioning the heart against something that's going to come at a later time. For the last 4 decades, people have been looking at a magic bullet to create this. It's really been a 40-year, multi-million, potentially billion-dollar path that's led to no endpoint cures. So most of my work in my PhD was focused on whole animal systems, looking at how systems and organs integrate into a larger animal and the physiology. When I moved to San Diego, I wanted to find a laboratory that was doing something totally different. And so I started working in cell biology. So the idea was to look at the cell as a basic unit of life and see how it adapts to stress.
What I knew he would be interested in was the clinical setting and the opportunity to really collect data in a way that we could do under no other circumstances when it comes to meditation.
Hemel is the vice chair of research for our department, so he's always coming up with ideas or running things past me. So one day he says, "Hey, I got to talk to you about something." And I said, "Okay, well, cut to the chase. What's going on? What is this guy doing?" He says, "Well, he meditates." And I said, "Meditates?" And Hemel said, "I think I can convince him to let me have biological samples." And I said, "What?" I guess what interested me the most was that we're going to get, physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, nurses, everyone to say, "Hey, this has a lot of value in the healthcare system. We've got to have evidence-based medicine." So I approved it.
It was at this point Inner Science was created. This is an organization formed to raise money just to fund the analysis of the research, separate from the data collection at our events.
For a university research project to operate, just like any study, they needed funding.
And of course, it had to be objective, rigorous research.
When UCSD got involved,
I felt it was important to help start a totally separate organization called Inner Science
to bring in the funding from our community. And there has been so much random support from people in the community that really want to be a part of the next phase of human potential. These are people who are donating money because they want to see a change.
And speeding. Mark it. Sheila, take one.
In my world, basically, I go and look for organizations myself that I can help the more holistic, more healing from a standpoint of body, mind, spirit, soul. So I asked the team leader, Hillary, what she knew about this research, and she just happened to be the person that knew the doctors and the scientists for this research. And she told me their name, and I asked her a little bit more, and intuitively I just knew. I said, "Well, how much do you need?" And that's how the research started. That's the seed that was planted.
At that point, we started to design the first study. I think the uniqueness of the study that we are doing here is that we apply the same tools and protocols and clinical design that we would use, for example, to design or run a pharmaceutical study.
I said to these guys, okay, most people, 90% of their thoughts that they think in one day are the same thoughts. And if they have the same thoughts, then they make the same choices. If they make the same choices, then they do the same things. If they do the same things, they create the same experiences in their life, and the same experiences in their life create the same feelings and the same emotions. And for the most part, we would have to agree that their biology, their neurocircuitry, their neurochemistry, their hormones, and even their gene expression would stay the same because they're staying the same. So I said to them, 7 days. If we get people to think differently and learn new information, to help them to make different choices than they typically do, teach them how to do things differently, allow them to have new experiences and feel new emotions, and teach them the science behind how to do all of those things based on a deep model of understanding of all the sciences integrated together. If they did that for 1 week, do you think that there could be biological changes that would take place from their brain all the way down to the gene expression?
We wanted to cast the widest net that we could to see, can we capture any signal that meditation has on the body? First place we wanted to look was the brain, the mind. So we used an EEG, which basically allows you to measure the electric activity of your brain. And we did that before and after and also during meditation. The second area where we looked was in the blood. So we drew blood from the meditators and controls before the meditation, after the meditation, and before the whole event and after the whole event. We looked at heart rate variability, which is a measure for autonomic nervous system functionality. We took saliva and cheek scrapes because in these cells you can do genetic testing and epigenetic expressions.
The hardest part of this study was to figure out who was going to be the control. The ideal control for this study, we ultimately sort of agreed on, would be the person that was at the resort relaxing but not meditating, right? So there's lots of spouses that come to these events. They're there to sort of relax and do some work. And so we recruited some of these into our initial control pool. The next group we wanted were a group of new meditators, right? People who don't know who Joe Dispensa is. This is their first time they're attending that event, and they have a degree of healthy skepticism. And then we wanted the other extreme group. We wanted the experienced meditators, the people that have come to multiple events, the ones that do these kinds of things at home every day. It's a core part of their life, like eating or exercise.
You went to an event.
Yep. The first event where I actually went, it was nothing like you'd predict a meditation workshop to be. I thought everything was going to smell like lavender and roses, and you'd walk in, to be Zen music tingling all over, and kind of, you almost imagine like mist in your face as you're sitting down. It was like a rock concert. It was loud, it was obnoxious. There were people wearing all kinds of crazy outfits. What are these guys doing? You'd never think that biology could come out of this, right? So I am probably the newest member of the team, and we were talking about skepticism. I'm probably the biggest healthy skeptic here in this room. We collected samples in February of 2020, so a month before the pandemic really took off and everything sort of shut down. It was around 30 subjects that we were looking at. The samples that we got sat in my -80 freezer for months. And I would get these weird calls from this guy, Joe Dispensa, and he'd be like, hey, just checking in, how's that study going? I'm like, okay, so we got to do something with those samples. So Juan's like, who's a postdoc in my lab? Who should I study? Let's just pick number one. It was an easy number to track in the freezers. And I'm like, run that sample on every system we have in the lab. So this was the first subject that entered our study. And then Juan finally got around to messing around with those samples. He looked at them. What we wanted to do was not invest too much manpower as well as financial resources into it. If there was nothing there, we wanted to move on to something bigger. And so we had blood before the event started, and we had blood 7 days into that event. So this, we figured, was if you're going to see a change. And so Juan looked at the before and after in these subjects, and he sent me a text with some pictures, and he said, this is unbelievable. There's some really, really mega changes. There was a biology that this subject created in a week of meditation that changes the surface of every biology that we've looked at.
There was tremolo in his voice. He said, dude, we have an effect. And that was even in this small group. There is a separation. There is a difference in what we're looking at. In that moment, we knew we're onto something. We knew there's an effect, and we knew we can measure that, and we knew the methodology that we're using is allowing us to do that.
Exosomes are a particular sized particle that have unique components inside them. They can have proteins inside them, microRNAs, mitochondrial DNA, all kinds of nucleic material that's able to modulate the effect from one cell to the next, one organ to the next, one body part to the other body part. We noticed that in these meditators, there was this interesting increase in both the novice and experienced meditators in the size of particles that would be represented by exosomes. By having one microparticle or an exosome filled with a couple of microRNAs, you could regulate hundreds of downstream gene products and proteins that essentially affect how a cell behaves and regulates. The hypothesis that we came up with is when a meditator goes into their meditative space, the brain electrical activity leads to a dramatic change in the cell biology behavior of a neuron. And so if the brain is full of neurons, during this elevated electrical activity, elevated emotion, the cell membrane, we hypothesize, potentially sheds pieces of that membrane and packages specific nucleic acid material to then allow that material to travel throughout the body, either through the blood-brain barrier or through cerebral spinal fluid, eventually reaching the bloodstream and being able to impact various organs within the body. This then leads to the release of a piece of the cell that packages information. This information, in the form of an exosome, with specific proteins, microRNAs, and other nucleic acid molecules, travels away from the neuron to, let's say, a cancer cell or a tumor somewhere in the body, and can manipulate the expression of genes and proteins and other things within that tumor to then change the behavior of that tumor cell.
When we look at the blood of 001, there's information in the blood that's really, really reflecting a greater level of order, a greater level of wholeness, a greater level of health. But it's not coming from his outer environment.
It can't be coming from the conference room. I've been to thousands of ballrooms and they all look the same. There's nothing too stimulating coming from the environment of a ballroom.
That information is coming from somewhere, and I keep asking the scientists, where are those chemicals coming from? Where are they coming from? That's information in his blood in the form of chemistry.
In other words, without taking any substance, chemicals are appearing in his body that were not there at the beginning of the event, and they're present at the end of the event.
So one of the early features we saw in subject 001 when we looked at the physical properties of the plasma is that there appeared to be an increase in the lipid content in that plasma. One of the things that researchers studying hibernation figured out and noticed early on is that moments before an animal goes into a hibernative state, there was this intense release of lipids into the plasma. The reason why this is important, it turns out that hibernating animals can reduce their heart rate to almost nothing. It's almost if they're in stasis, right? They're in this non-animated state of life. If you're in a hibernative state, you're probably secreting factors in your blood that adapt your body to this stress and this de-stress system that you've put yourself into. And so we think that this is what we may have captured in 001, this quasi-meditative hibernative state that leads to an augmentation of factors in subject 001's blood, suggesting that there may be some components of hibernation that intertwine with the meditative experience. We only thought that certain types of animals could do this, but it turns out that humans potentially have the possibility of creating a hibernation type state as well. Potentially, the body could go into almost a near-death-like state, and all of a sudden, something triggers, and you resurrect yourself almost instantly as if nothing happened.
Meditation is a great way to close your eyes and disconnect from the seduction of the outer environment. And as you close your eyes, less sensory information is coming back to your brain. Play some music that drowns the space so you don't hear the coffee maker and you don't hear the neighbor or the lawnmower. Your inner world starts changing. You're not eating, you're not smelling, you're not tasting, you're not feeling. And you're laboring to get beyond the emotions of your body, the habituations of these programs that want us to get up and check our cell phone, get up when we're too busy, or relive an emotion of the past and feel the feeling. The body wants to feel, and you're asking the body to sit still and not experience anything.
But of course, if you're not feeling anything, the question is, where does your consciousness go?
So then the thought was, let's just look in a very unbiased way at everything that could be there, right? So we sent the samples off to UC Davis. They have a nationally funded core that looks at metabolites. Metabolites can come from various cells when they're using energy, not using energy, when they're in stasis, when they're active. All of these things lead to a release of metabolites, and metabolites can come from your gut that then create raw material for your cells in your body to use to do the energetic things that they need to do to create and sustain life. After the week-long experience, there are thousands of metabolites that went up and hundreds of metabolites that went down after this experience. There may be unique sets of these metabolites that regulate unique cellular processes. There was this dramatic shift from the control. Again, subject 001 had this amazing explosion of metabolites in their blood that were augmented and changed, and this was happening in the majority of the event population of novice meditators. All I know is that these numbers are incredible. Something biological is changing in these individuals. Things that from a science perspective we never imagined, we now have the potential to discover. So then the question was, because of this difference from the control, is there some unique biology that his blood creates? And so the Department of Anesthesia here runs the viral vector core for the MESA. And we thought, could we look at some immunity aspects of his blood? So we tried a couple different viruses, and it turned out that there were some factors that were elevated in the blood. What we noticed in the blood of subject 001 and many other meditators that we've looked at over the last couple years is they elevate a specific protein in their blood called serpin A5. And when we think about the biology of how SARS gets into the cell, serpin A5 becomes a really interesting, important protein to look at. It's a protease inhibitor. And so when you think about how SARS gets in, spike protein binds to ACE2 receptors, and a protease comes in to cleave that binding to then allow the virus to internalize. What meditators do is that they elevate the serpin A5 protein, which acts as an inhibitor of the scissors that chop that interaction. So now the virus is able to bind to the surface of the cell, but it's stuck there. There's no way for it to get inside, and meditators have elevated the specific protein that creates this phenotype. This was a very interesting finding that we had, and we weren't the first ones to look at this, but we were the first ones to see it in meditation. Others around the COVID pandemic had already proposed serpins and serpin A5 as particular druggable targets for SARS-CoV-2 infection. It's interesting to note that meditators, without taking a drug, are elevating the specific protein that creates this antiviral effect of not having the virus be able to enter the cell by meditating. This is something that we're very interested in figuring out, is how the mind can alter immune function.
It's profound information because whether it's SARS-CoV-2 virus or any virus,
it just suggests that the person is living in a new emotional state. And the body is so objective that it doesn't know the difference between the real-life experience that's creating that emotion and the emotion that person is creating by thought alone. It's believing it's living in a favorable environment that's actually strengthening the body instead of weakening the body by our normal stress response to the outer world.
There's some type of connection, some type of order, some elevated state. Somehow then, the cell is actually greater than the environment. The body is actually believing it's living in an environment that's really healthy, really nurturing, that promotes restoration and repair.
Now, according to epigenetics, it's the environment that signals the gene. But if the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, by changing our emotional state, we could actually signal genes ahead of the environment. And that's exactly what seems to be happening.
My name is Jacqueline Bonds. I am a neuroscientist. I earned my PhD from the University of Illinois at Chicago. So essentially, I look at protein signaling, physiology of cells within the context of the central nervous system. Hemmel had talked to me about the protein that they discovered, serpin A5. This protein is elevated in people who meditate, and even between a novice and experienced meditator, you do see an elevation. You see this huge increase in this particular protein. And what they were able to show was that when you have an elevation of SERPINA5, that you essentially block a virus from being able to get into the cell and essentially make it sick. So elevation of this particular protein was helping to boost immunity to viruses. When I actually saw the picture of it, I mean, pictures are worth 1,000 words, right? So it really convinced me that this could be real.
So the question was, does the blood of a meditator have information to shut down metabolism in a cancer cell? So when you put blood from a control individual, it looks no different, right? The cancer cell is behaving just like it normally would. When we take blood from subject 001, who has had magical experiences at these events, and there is some amazing things in this individual's blood, you see this suppression of mitochondrial functionality.
I think after we saw the significant changes in 001's blood, the suppression of mitochondrial function in cancer cells from meditation, this was really significant because the information that was in his blood was not coming from his senses. It wasn't coming from some drug or some pill or some treatment that he was taking. It was coming from within him.
So then the question becomes, what happened to this person?
So in February of 2020, I was randomly picked before that event out of, I think, 1,100 people or something like that to participate in a research study. And I remember the day I got like the email, like, you've been chosen, I actually had a lot of fear around it. And the reason was because you have to do these brain mapping thing, you know, they put these caps on your head. And when our daughter was born, she had issues, and my brother-in-law was just like, just do it. Like, you got picked, you know, and he kind of just gave me what I needed to hear. So I was like, you know what, you're right. I got to get over this. And we had to do all this testing, blood work, brain maps, breathing. And before the event started, they wanted like a baseline, and then they were going to do it again 7 days later after. When I showed up to the room for the research, I was the first person there. And on the 6th day, we kind of ended the day and we went into a walking meditation. I just remember starting to feel really good. And I was like, you know what? I don't want anything. I don't want, you know, a house or a car or any stuff. Like, I just want joy. I just want to feel joy. And I was just so kind of in love and feeling this joy. And as I have that thought, then my eyes are closed. I start to see this bright light. And then I'm like, wow, that's weird. And it's actually kind of annoying because I'm thinking like a volunteer is by me with a flashlight, and this light was getting brighter. He then says, open your eyes and walk. So I open my eyes and I look around and no one is near me. So the last day of the event, I had another crazy experience with the light. And during that, they did the blood draw, breath again, and the brain mapping. And during that brain map, it's only like a short 30-minute meditation. And as I was just staring at the wall, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I might explode, because I feel like that energy was still in my body. And I'm like, it's okay. I'm going to be all right. I'm going to just go through this. So they start the meditation. I close my eyes, and within seconds, my neck just starts arching back in the chair. And I could hear, I remember I had headphones on, and I could hear my heartbeat like in my ears. I just felt like I was going to explode. The second it was done, I just like pointed to the ground. I was like, I need to lay on the ground. My whole body was just shaking uncontrollably. It took me probably like 45 minutes to really settle my body down.
It was on the day when we did what we call the post and data collection. After the event is over, they stay so we can collect the data. And I remember him coming out of the EEG room where we did the EEG, and he looked like he literally just gave birth. He was so sweaty, and I could tell just by looking at him that something very profound happened.
We've seen this in brain scans. There's a moment where all of a sudden a person connects. And the person goes into these very, very, very high states of coherent gamma brainwave patterns. And it's not happening in their neocortex. It's happening in the limbic brain, the seat of the autonomic nervous system. And that's the nervous system that controls and coordinates all other systems. It's automatic in nature, and it has two branches. A branch that creates an arousal, the sympathetic nervous system, and the parasympathetic nervous system slows things down for metabolism, growth, and repair. And typically, when we have an arousal in our lives, the arousal is caused from the hormones of stress. And it's usually anger, it's usually aggression, it's usually fear, it's usually anxiety, it's usually pain.
So what's normal is when people meditate is you get a profound upregulation of the parasympathetic nervous system. We call that high frequencies when we look at their heart rhythms. And you'd expect that, right? You're resting, you're relaxing, you're repairing. So we see that phenomenon in our participants. But what's unique is that we also see a profound upregulation in the sympathetic nervous system as classified by low frequencies. This is classic, that like fight or flight arousal. But instead of being aroused by pain or fear or anger, these people are experiencing an arousal through joy, bliss, ecstasy.
The sympathetic nervous system seems to be driving an enormous amount of coherent energy in the form of very high frequencies to the brain. And that level of order in his autonomic limbic system is changing his physiology in that moment.
When he first came to us, he was in quite a stressed state and his heart rate variability was quite low. So your heart rate variability is a very profound marker for health and longevity. So what's normal is that it reduces between 2 to 5% per year as we age. So it's a marker of age. But what we saw in Gabe was that in the course of just 7 days, he could double his heart rate variability to 200%. So the amplitude of energy in his heart and the frequency he was able to create in his body was profound.
Michelle, take one.
I'm Michelle Poirier. I'm a research scientist. My background is in molecular and cell biology and neurobiology, neurodegenerative diseases. I was a professor at Johns Hopkins for many years. Ran a lab aimed at trying to understand the neurobiology of Huntington's disease. I work with Hemmel to help write the research papers. So that's a very big part of my job because of my background, because of my credentials. My impression is that these people, their brains look like people who have been meditating for decades. They're really extraordinary. And they haven't been meditating for decades. I've never seen data like this in my many years of research. And I think that's what we're seeing over and over again in this community, is that the brain scans are really, even with a novice, and you take a novice meditator and they spend a week at one of our events, and you look at their brain before and after, and the changes are really, they're profound.
My life has changed a lot since getting into Dr. Joe's work, to really almost sit back and watch, because there's huge ups, huge downs, and to not like emotionally react. Whereas years ago, I certainly would have, but to just be present and to sit through that can create some really good outcomes if you start to get that type of mindset. And with my family, with my wife, things have been really great.
What do you think it is?
I think it is God. There's a lot of names for that, you know, the divine, the universe, God. But I think it is this world that we live in. It's all matter, and all of that matter is coming from light. And if you travel back up with it, eventually you get to the source of that light. And to me, that is what it is. It is the source of that light that is creating us and creating all of this.
When people enter this realm called time-space, everything's energy, everything's frequency, everything's connected. There's no separation, there's more holism, there's more order.
I know it's hard to wrap our minds around this, but everything in our known universe is made up of atoms. And it's a scientific fact that the atom is 99.99999% energy, frequency, information, and it's 0.00001% matter. It's the particle wave conundrum. That means that we're perceiving a very small percentage of reality. What we're asking people to do is take all of their attention off of matter, the particle, and put their attention on energy, the wave.
The brain begins to move into these wonderfully elegant states of order, and that person is now connecting to something greater.
The research meetings are always very interesting because you have Dr. Joe who's trying to teach transformation and wants information to teach it better. And then you have the researchers who are just looking to see what are the effects that are happening, what's going on during these meditations. So they don't always agree.
And Dr. Joe and some of the team may have theories that they may throw out there that they believe to be true.
But we want to be able to find things that we can prove scientifically.
The utility and the problem in science is you have to repeat experiments many, many, many times to see if the finding is truly real or if it is just random happen chance that it's happening. They started with really deep analytics of a small subset of individuals going through this experience, the controlled novice experience, and now they've expanded to looking at almost the whole room and what is the experience of that individual and the community as a whole. And if we're going to move the marker in terms of what's happening, this is what we're going to have to do, is study larger and larger populations.
That was very unique to have this 001 blood being the one where we showed the most effects. And then afterwards, of course, we validated everything by doing studies with a lot more people under the same circumstances and then recreating similar results.
So we started looking at more and more of these samples. So 11 out of 13, that's 84% of experienced individuals show the same response as subject 001 in terms of decreasing mitochondrial function in breast cancer cells. And with this hibernation aspect, basically the cancer cells are aerobic and energetic, and whatever is in the plasma of these experienced meditators turns them into quiet, glycolytic, inefficient cells.
So the tests that we run for each of the studies is really going to depend on what we're looking for. What question are we asking in that study?
In the studies that we had originally done on the immune effects of meditation, we were able to show that one protein that potentially creates this immunity factor was SERPINA5. It's a protease in the blood, and there were always elevated levels in experienced meditators after the week-long event in this protein. And we think this protein is one of the key features of this heightened immunity kind of response. And so to sort of get everyone on board that they're involved in the study, we gave them that as a target. For the experimental group, then I gave them 4 additional genes, and then we listed the proteins and the amazing things they do in your body. And the intention was they got a flashcard that had the name of the protein and the crystal structure of that protein. So every morning they were supposed to focus on those 5 genes and 5 proteins and intently increase the elevation of these things, right? So it's, can the mind control the expression pattern of these 5 genes that we're targeting? For the control group, Outside of serpin, they were asked to focus on 4 additional proteins. I made up the names of those proteins. They don't exist. The structures are not real structures. They're fake structures. But the information that they got under the names is exactly the same information that the experimental group got. If the mind really could change the pattern of these genes and these particular things that they targeted, which would be getting us closer and closer to this notion of how is this effect being transmitted.
Remember, both groups had serpin A5, a real protein, and we see that in Group A, which focused on 5 real genes and proteins, 100% of the subjects had an increase in serpin A5. However, with Group B subjects who consciously believed that they had 5 real genes and proteins, we saw no change in serpin A5. This is absolutely mind-blowing. Somehow, the innate intelligence of the body could not accept the order because even though there was a real protein in there, it wasn't just 1 real plus 4 fake. It was the entire order that the mind and body were looking for. And since the 4 were not real, the intelligence canceled the order. This gets us one step closer to thinking about how the mind is a unique regulator of the body.
I didn't want to have surgery. I said, okay, God, if I have to have the surgery, then that's fine. But if it's possible, allow my thyroid to grow back. I literally went into the surgery completely surrendering, completely letting go and trusting whatever happens on the other side. And after I went through that surgery, Dr. Joe teaches us that we are divine and that, we have source within us. And then eventually when you practice it enough, it no longer becomes something you think in your head. You know it, you feel it, you align with it. I started doing Dr. Joe's work. I knew I could heal myself. There was no doubt in my mind. I was doing the meditation. I didn't know at the time that growing a thyroid was like growing back your liver or a lung or your heart. I didn't know that. And so every day I would hold my hand to my throat. I would tell it I loved it. I would ask it to heal itself, to grow back, to come back to me. And just kept meditating. And then when I went back to my doctor, they do like a follow-up checkup. I don't know what's going on. And so she dropped the dose down again, but I need to send you back to your surgeon because you don't have a thyroid, but your numbers are still extremely high. So I go back to the surgeon and the surgeon is like grumbling, like, your doctor doesn't know what she's talking about. Like, she's making a mistake. She's not measuring them correctly. And he hooks up the ultrasound and he puts it to my throat. And at this time, I'm in my own world. I'm not really paying attention to what he's doing. And all of a sudden, the doctor turns ashen white, drops the ultrasound handle in my lap, and he runs out the room. He comes back about 5 minutes later. And at this point now, he's even paler than he was before. And he looks terrified. And he says, I don't know how this happened. He was holding my x-rays in his hands. And he said, this is your x-ray after you had surgery. I did my job. I removed your thyroid. It's completely removed. Here you can see, and he's describing like the parts of the thyroid that he removed. And he said, your thyroid grew back. And he said, in my 27 years of practicing, that's happened maybe twice where the tissue grew back. But this is the first case where it's actually producing hormone. Like your thyroid grew back and it's working. You have to stop all medications. And we're going to have to do, and he was like, getting ready to say surgery again. But I stopped him. I was like, no. This is my miracle. Here's the thing. I'm a science girl. I graduated pre-med biology. The basis for everything I do is science. I sold drugs on a regular basis. I talk medicine. I talk numbers on a regular basis. I understand how this works. So for me to be able to say, you can do this and move beyond the known to an unknown, to cause your body to produce chemicals that actually allow you to heal yourself, where you can allow cells
to regenerate and grow itself in your body, like to somebody that's in the medical field, that doesn't make any sense.
With that story, what do you think was happening?
Wow. I always like to have my belief in possibility stretched a little bit more. I think that's what keeps Hemel coming back. I think that's what keeps Toby coming back. I think that's what keeps all the researchers coming back. I mean, is it possible to grow a new organ back? Well, it might be now. Someone did it. They changed something in the field to allow that organ to begin to do what it's supposed to do.
It was like having a second chance at life. It felt like I was coming in alignment with who I was. After doing the 7-day retreat, I learned how to align with the unknown and tap into a power that's in each and every single one of us.
What do you think that unknown source is?
This beingness that permeates through everything all at the same time, through multiple dimensions. And it's hard to describe it in words. And in our human brains, I'll say Father, Mother, God, because God is beyond male or female. God is beyond a thing. It's in everything. It's in all.
When you study people with spontaneous remissions from disease, and we've interviewed enough people, I think the fundamental thing that has to change for a person is their doubt. A belief in a new possibility and then continuously practicing it until they begin to change that belief on both neurologically and chemically. People who actually heal reach a point where they absolutely know that something has changed, and many of them say, I know that I'm healed. So the philosophy then, the theory, is something void of experience. We want to push people into the experience. So when they have an inner experience, if you want to call that a spiritual moment, something transforms in them as a result of their interaction inwardly.
I mean, that's real stuff, right? What we're doing is we are quantifying how powerful the mind is. And we can really control our biology. And we're showing that quantitatively. One of the most fascinating cases I've come across is a young woman with cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disease. Having studied Huntington's disease for many years, Huntington's disease is another genetic disease, and knowing that there isn't a cure and that these diseases are progressive, so the symptoms worsen over time, I really couldn't believe what I witnessed.
There came to a point where they say, it's time for a double lung transplant. When I kind of suddenly got bad, I went up to 40 liters of oxygen, which takes a special machine. It's not just a regular oxygen tank that can do that. So 40 liters of oxygen is a lot. It's something you typically don't come back from. But, you know, for a normal, healthy person, you'd probably feel compelled to go to the hospital once you fell down to about 60%. I was living a pretty rough life there for a bit. And for most people, like if they fell down to 20%, they would die. I was sitting there with my fiance, Angel, and we decided to try something his mom had sent him, which was the Progressive and Intensive Video course. So that was my first introduction to Dr. Joe. And we watched the first video and we kind of just looked at each other and we were like, this is it. This is the thing. This is the option that didn't exist before. So my fiance and I were at the Dr. Joe event, our first Dr. Joe event. I'm still in the wheelchair and still on oxygen. I definitely need both. The very last meditation of that week was my breakthrough. So I can tell the people beside me can totally feel me doing what I'm doing. Like I was convulsing so hard that my eye covers came off. I was just kind of like, what's happening? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? At first I was like embarrassed and I was like, I should stop. This is bad. Isn't this what's supposed to happen if I'm letting energy do stuff? I was just trying to like let go and let it happen. And that part of the meditation ends and I sit up and I'm like, what just happened to me? I was so confused. I was trying to reason it out in my head as best I could. And by the time we got down to the beach, I had kind of come to the realization like that was energy. I kind of didn't really leave space in my head to be shocked by it because I was just so focused on forward. That was it. That was all that was in my head, was just forward. I just wanted to walk and I let it happen. And I didn't need the wheelchair at all after that. My body was just moving. It was just moving me. By the end of that meditation, when we stopped and I kind of came to, and my little assistant was like, you were walking pretty fast, you were passing people. And I was just like, really? Despite how tired I had felt before, all of a sudden, I didn't feel like I needed to sit down. I didn't feel like I needed a rest. I didn't feel tired or out of breath. I just had a moment of trust. I had a moment of being willing to let go of my control of the situation. I realized that I had been planning everything out in my head before I did it and allocating my energy the way you would allocate a budget, like I had a limited amount. But for that meditation, I let all that go. I let go of the need to plan. I let go of the fear of pain after walking. So from that point on, I left the wheelchair behind. I don't need oxygen anymore.
What do these doctors say?
My doctors, they're surprised. I feel like it's like a polite, restrained sort of surprise, where they're happy for me, of course, because, they're my doctors. They care about me. But they don't really have an explanation for why I'm feeling so well or why I'm walking around without oxygen. And I think because they don't have an explanation, they think that it's just a fluke, that it's just a moment of nice feelings that will eventually go away again, and I'll get sick again, and I'll need their help again.
What do you think?
I don't think that's the case. I don't think I'm going to need the transplant. I genuinely believe that my body is healing, that anything can happen.
Chelsea had her moment. She connected. Every single cell in her body is being touched by a greater frequency. We dial down the brainwave activity in the thinking brain into a slower state. The different compartments of the brain that have been firing out of order because of the hormones of stress start to synchronize. And what syncs in the brain links in the brain, and the brain starts functioning in a more holistic state. Measuring different compartments of the brain, you see the whole brain in a symphony moving to the same rhythm. There's information that can be cascaded across networks. There's a resonance taking place in the brain. There's more order. The person starts to feel more like themselves.
So the big questions that we're asking is, how does meditation change the body? How do we, as humans, have the ability to heal ourselves, both physiologically and mentally?
There is this now deeper evidence to suggest that the brain is really changing, not only the electrical circuitry, but how all of the brain structures are connected together. The lab here in San Diego gave us access to lots of equipment that we would not have access to anywhere else. And so one piece of equipment that's super expensive, super large, that you can't move is the functional magnetic resonance image machine, so the fMRI. So we did a study called Imagine, and this was the first study that would couple an fMRI study to an EEG study, to blood, to Garmin, to survey. The EEG gives you surface level electrical activity. So it penetrates a couple centimeters in, but it's really looking at surface level electrical activities. The fMRI probes deep into your brain. It's looking at deep structures and how they're connected, how they're being utilized. So 40 people in 2 weekends went through the Imagine study.
So Alex is on this march to figure this out. Alex has an expertise. He's a CogSci PhD student in the laboratory. His big expertise is fMRI and the mathematical processing of that data. And so he's been applying some really amazing algorithms to that data analytics.
The most unique thing that we found with this data using functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, which is essentially taking a video of your brain in a machine, is a couple of things. The first is we see that a network, which is called the default mode network, which is generally active when we are mind wandering, which we think is really important when we're predicting what is going to happen to us, less integrated, that the different parts of the network are talking to one another much less while you're meditating. The other thing that we find really, really interesting is that we see lower connectivity between parts of the brain that are more cognitive, that are in the frontal part of the brain, and areas that are in the back and the bottom part in the cerebellum, which are usually making predictions. We find that this technique of meditation allows us to turn off the part of the brain that is making these predictions about the future. And the general idea, the general scientific consensus is that we don't really experience reality as it is with our senses, but we rather predict it. The brain uses our senses in order to just correct the prediction. And what we're seeing is that this technique of meditation breaks that down. It breaks down the networks and the parts of the brain that are generating those predictions. Another thing that we found really, really interesting and unique about this type of meditation is that generally when the brain is in a normal state that is not meditating, it operates by splitting itself into modules, like neighborhoods. But between neighborhoods, we don't see that they're talking to each other a lot, except with very few connections. And we saw that when people started meditating, all parts of the brain started to become more directly connected with every other part of the brain. And what we found to be particularly surprising was that this not only occurred when people started meditating, but it also happened after going through the retreat when people were not meditating.
I'm not a neuroscientist, but the evidence that we're gathering suggests that the networks that normally fire in our daily activities can be rewired to think about other things. So the way I think about it from this space is that your thought patterns tend to accumulate and really make you behave the way you do.
There's an invisible field of energy that exists beyond our senses that we're unaware of because we have no attention on it. And we teach them that it's not matter that emits the field, that actually it's the field that creates matter. And if they could change the information in the field, could they change the hologram in three-dimensional reality? I want that feedback to say, the science is saying it's the truth, because I can't believe it a lot of times, and the testimonies are telling me it's the truth, then I want to hear that because then I can speak with more conviction. We've seen this numerous times. There's the cancer, and all of a sudden, it's gone. Get a collective group of people that can get beyond themselves, become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, and no time, to get beyond this three-dimensional reality, take all their attention and energy and put it on a field. And if you get 8 people, brain and heart coherence, and they're connected, they're going to create beautiful patterns of coherence in that person's field, and they're going to change the information in the field.
Coherence healing was something I just couldn't wrap my head around. It was this almost secretive part of an event where you'd go, and then towards the later parts of the week when the group was coherent, you'd start focusing on individuals that needed your help in terms of fixing whatever was wrong with them.
The coherence healing is a specific form of meditation that Dr. Joe teaches, where we have between 6 and 8 people, we call healers, sitting in a circle. And at the center of that circle is a healee, one person. And Dr. Joe teaches us how to activate our heart center and create a field around our body. And we know when you change your emotional energetic state that that field can actually expand between 3 up to 10 feet wide. It's measurable on what they call squid magnetometers. What we've seen time and time again is that our healees who have a physical condition, who lay in the center of this circle, surrounded by the healers, as they begin to raise their energy, create more coherence in their heart, they are affecting the field around them. And this is starting to imprint on the field of the healee.
The group healings, I like to think of them as it's a form of biofield therapy. If you look in the literature, biofield therapy, these type of studies come up, and there are many. We ask the question, can these people, this group of people, influence the biology of that person? And so we have a couple of ways of looking at that from a scientific standpoint.
So we've seen, from the data that I started to collect, that 80% of our healees report to us that they have a change in their health condition.
And this is where we then got involved to really accelerate these experiments to the next level. So the question in my mind when I go to these events is the person comes up and does a testimonial and their cancer's gone in 7 days. And you're like, no way. As a human, you're like, that's amazing. As a scientist, you're like, bullshit. There's no way that's happening. And so I wanted to design an experiment that would test this in the lab. And so what we actually did is we have lots of cancer cells in the lab. So the idea was, could we bring healers into a room and have them focus around an incubator full of normal and cancer cells? Cancer cells have no body, no mind, but they can receive energy, right? It's a living system. It's the basic unit of life. And the studies that we did were controlled so that we did them 4 or 5 times. We had controls where cells were sitting in a laboratory that no one has ever seen at the same time from the same population. We had normal cells as well as cancer cells in that incubator, and we looked at the biology on all of this. And what we noticed is that whatever these individuals did as a group was able to change the biology of a cancer cell in a dish. So this starts to build this level of evidence, right? We see these amazing things that happen to individuals that come to these events. We see these amazing things that happen to groups of individuals that are being healed in an in-person coherence healing. And now we can show that this, whatever energy is being created, actually has the ability to change the behavior of a cell in a dish that has no mind, no body. So it's this continuum of studies that's starting to build increasing amounts of evidence to suggest that something's happening.
When I was diagnosed with the multiple myeloma, they started me on chemotherapy right away. The test that tells you they have myeloma is something called serum protein electrophoresis. It was supposed to be 0, but in my case was higher. Bone marrow biopsy tells you the normal proportion of cells. Usually the plasma cells in your bone marrow are supposed to be maybe 3-4%. 40% of my bone marrow was cancer. 40%. I have a repeat test and shows suboptimal response. I continue to have another chemotherapy with some partial response of the cancer, but then by 5-6 months, I underwent the bone marrow transplant. You're going to lose your hair. You're going to get this, diarrhea that you need to use diapers. It's like a cookbook. You give a chemotherapy and you give another chemotherapy. You don't respond. You get bone marrow transplant, blood test every 3 months, seeing how your disease is doing. Being a doctor and feel sick with cancer is a strange sensation in the way that we have control over disease and we decide and advise other people what to do when they get sick. I have to trust other people, doing things unto me. So it's humbling. In November 2022, I had the blood test, the serum protein electrophoresis showing that was progressively getting higher. And at that time, I discussed with the oncologist about what to do. I knew that it was going to progress. So we decided that, just to start a 4th line of chemotherapy. In multiple myeloma, medically, we're not talking about curing the disease with the chemotherapy. I'm just being maintained, preventing it from getting worse at a rapid pace, but always there will be expected to have some progression of the disease. I knew that something is not going in the right direction. My wife, as a psychologist, has been exposed to Joe Dispensa previously. She's the one who said, they have this Joe Dispensa retreat. I didn't think that going to the Joe Dispensa retreat would cure me, or I would find the cure of being healed from cancer. That was not the expectation. I went to the retreat in June 2023 with the expectation of being able to meditate. I didn't expect to go into the retreat to get cured from the cancer.
So how did you get signed up for a coherence healing?
I didn't know that I was a healing. I saw in my badge there was like a golden heart, a sticker. I said, I didn't know what is this about. So I asked the person, what is this about? Oh, you're being selected as a healer. You're going to have sessions of healing. It will be towards the end of the retreat. For the coherence healing, I really had no idea what was going to happen. I was maybe a little bit scared about what's going to happen. When I was there for the first healing session, I felt like I was being touched on the leg. I said, this is my imagination. There's nothing. There's no one here. And then when the healers came in, that they do they rub their hands, they put their hands over me without touching me. And then what I see is like the ripples of the wave when they reach the sand, that they're moving a certain way. That's the pattern. That's what I see when I close my eyes. I left. I didn't feel much that first time. Then when I went with my wife to the room at that night, it was pitch black. And I noticed that some like bluish color, like fog in the room. And it lasted maybe a few minutes. I thought it was not connected to the healing process. So I didn't think much about that. It was interesting. Then there was going to go to the second healing process. And what happened made the whole difference. Before getting in, there was one of the person directing us, very kind. He said to every one of us, remember that you're worthy. Remember that you're worthy. Remember that you're worthy. And that resonated in me. It said, accept whatever they give you. And what happened was totally different. My eyes were closed, but I thought maybe a flashlight, a floodlight, and then opened my eyes a little bit. There was nothing. It was like a dim room. I closed my eyes again. Again was shining this bright light to my eyes. And then I felt this overwhelming sense of love filling up my chest. It was pure love, pure bliss. And tears came down my face. I was, unexpected. I didn't expect that to happen. I didn't ask for that. It simply came. I'm different. I feel like more, the senses are amplified. It's a state of bliss that you experience. One of the persons that was the healers came to me and gave me this little card. And he said, I took this card and it was meant to be given to you. And it said, healed. That means a lot for me, really. This little card, I keep it with me, and it means a lot for me. 2 weeks afterward, I had the test. I went to the oncologist, I have not been taking the chemotherapy for a few weeks already. And when the blood test came back, the oncologist is very empiric, scientific, Johns Hopkins trained oncologist. He said, Charlie, there's nothing here. There's no cancer. There was nothing, it was zero, absent. And he said, well, we don't even have to do a bone marrow biopsy, because I said, no, I want you to have the bone marrow biopsy because I want to prove that this works. When I was diagnosed initially, 5 years ago, 40% of the bone marrow was cancer. So it was progressing. The cancer, it was there and was progressing. And then after the Joe Dispensa retreat, Coherence Healing, the oncologist, he called me on the phone. Charlie, the bone marrow came back, nothing. There's no cancer here. Nothing, not even a residual part that I would have expected with the chemotherapy. As a physician, I'm working with other physicians. They see me, they always ask, how are you doing? I say, well, this happened to me. And I explain, my experience with, being healed.
What do you think it is?
It comes from a higher realm, dimension. The blue light is a manifestation in our material world of something superior, something higher than us. It's a higher vibration, and there's no space for the material limitation of disease.
It's the scientists and the evidence that's saying that transformation's happening. All we see is the subjective change in the person. We see them show up as one person and leave as somebody else.
I think people learn by example, right? You see someone make this dramatic transformation and you think, hey, if they can do that, then I can do that too. And then it's not just one, it's happening over and over and over again in this work.
We have data to suggest and evidence to suggest that you're changing. We don't believe in something until we actually either experience it, see it, or can figure out some evidence for it. And so we're providing that baseline evidence. Our data is suggesting that it's not an individual effect, it's a group effect. Not only does 001 change, but every person who experiences what 001 experiences changes in one way or another. A lot of them change in that same direction. As we were discovering some of these things in meditation, the worry I had as a scientist was, am I going to a space where I'm not going to be seen as a credible scientist, right? I'm saying that I may have some answers about why people are healing and doing all of these amazing things at an event. And it starts to push the envelope way beyond where most science is comfortable with. When I revealed some of this data to my colleagues, I was happily surprised that they were very interested in this, right? They were shocked as well at the finding. It was well controlled. And we knew from that perspective that there was really a change happening. It was not an abnormality. It was not an artificial kind of change. It was not baked in any way. It was a true scientific effect that we were observing.
I think what's most surprising in this study is no matter what retreat we're at, that we can actually reproduce the same results in looking at the specific protein. The fact that we're able to see different groups represented within our very, very large sample, which of course, if you have a large enough sample, you're going to be able to observe different effects. But the fact that we're observing the same effects with this elevation of SERPIN-A5, it's consistent across all of these different retreats that we're at, is being able to actually see that this is being able to be reproduced.
While we're in the early stages of discovery, we're not claiming that this is the only therapy people should use in their healing journey. But something truly remarkable is happening to people in this work, and we are able to measure it scientifically.
Today, the conversation I never thought I dreamed of having. Even just a few years ago, that was not the conversation on the table. Imagine a drug study, 18 to 25% causality, cause and effect. Our data suggests 75% cause and effect. The autonomic nervous system is making a pharmacy of chemicals that works better than any drug.
And I think this is where future studies need to head, and I think our data is showing that. Without any exogenous treatments of anything, right? You don't have to take a drug to do this.
Because of this, we're asking more questions around our current findings. How does meditation affect the gut microbiome? How does it affect pregnant mothers? What are the effects on twins? We have just scratched the surface. This is just the beginning to understand our human potential.
We need to have the evidence behind it. We practice evidence-based medicine, and that means that in order to see how we get from using something and its effects, we have to know the steps. And that's what Hemel is aiming to do with all of his research. And it's super exciting because there are results there.
We're going to put as much data and science behind this as possible. And the beauty about working with someone like Dr. Joe is that he is open to finding out the truth and adapting to it. And if you look at science, this is precisely, I think, how we have evolved as a species. And the more we evolve in science, the more knowledge we have, the better we can explain observations. So I hope that the way that we explain the findings that we have right now and that we observe from this meditation retreats will be refined as we go along and add more subjects to the database, add more tools and technologies to looking into that. I expect us to find more nuances than we're even aware of right now.
This is empowering to the individual.
If we don't need anything outside of us because we're whole and complete ourselves, it means we no longer need to judge or feel separate from each other. When I feel connected and whole, I don't need anything outside of me. So this is kind of a threat to society as it is right now. Dr. Joe's teaching and the scientific studies around them are empowering individuals to transform themselves and to feel connected and whole.
I want to be part of that community that believes in possibility, that believes we're greater than we think, more powerful than we know, more unlimited than we could ever dream. And all I offer people is my greatest understanding of the truth and numerous opportunities to experience it, nothing more. We've come down to a simple formula of brain and heart coherence that frees people's minds and opens their hearts and leads them to that door of unlimited possibilities. The side effect of that practical application of the formula brings them to a greater understanding of themselves and a greater understanding of what's possible. Moving closer to wholeness, moving closer to source. In this realm, beyond that point, things are connected. Things are more orderly. Things are greater and greater levels of frequency or order. So at its very source of that point of creation, that void, that vacuum, that oneness, that wholeness, that singularity, that universal mind, the all possibilities, the all in all, that is the source of everything physical and material. There are greater levels of frequency that we can become aware of. They already exist. It is our relationship to source. This is how we as humans change frequency, change the information in the field in order to change the destiny of matter, from sickness to health, and ultimately the consciousness of the planet.